The gameplay in Donut County is pretty straightforward. You drag a hole in the ground around with your finger, swallowing things that are small enough to drop into the hole. The game slowly evolves into a series of small puzzles you need to solve in order to move forward. Using a catapult to launch things into the air to hit a switch in the distance, for instance. Filling your hole with water to power a carousel. Or lighting rockets, dropping them into the hole, and aiming for a target. The gameplay started out really neat and fun, but got boring over time. The pace was too slow, keep me wanting to come back though. Each level more or less was the same thing, with just a handful of gameplay mechanics introduced into the game, and even though the level count is fairly small at 24, it eventually got repetitive. I entered the last 4 levels of the game without knowing they were the last ones. These levels actually felt really fleshed out and challenging, and it made me think I had finally finished the training levels and gotten into the game, only to discover it was actually the end of the game. I assumed the pacing of the game was done on purpose, in order to let players gradually get comfortable, because there wasn't any tutorial to explain how the player was supposed to play the game. I enjoyed the lack of a tutorial though, and kind of wished more games did this. It was fun and rewarding to discover how to do things completely on my own. The satisfaction of figuring out the mechanics yourself isn't something I often get when playing games anymore. There was so much potential here to have a great puzzle game, but it ultimately felt like a drawn-out series of quests that teach the user how the game was supposed to be played. I enjoyed it enough though to hope for a second, more fleshed out sequel. The story in the Donut County was a little lackluster. You discover the entire town is in the middle of the earth somehow, and over time, you're told how the inhabitants eventually got there. Each inhabitant that tells their tale has you play through the associated level. The story for each inhabitant is ultimately the same though, just in a different setting. Sitting through the cutscenes felt like a waste of time because of this, making me wish for a skip button so I could just get into the puzzle. The story tries to be funny and it has some amusing dialogue on occasions. It feels like I'm reading text messages though instead of reading a conversation amongst a group of people. It didn't bother me too much in the small doses that the game delivered it in though. The story was consistent from inhabitant to inhabitant, but the end game was fairly predictable. As predictable as the story was though, it did not take away from the game for me. I found it to be decently entertaining. The only downside I think was that the story was a little short. The game mechanics didn't vary enough that the story became repetitive even though it was short. The graphics in Donut County were really good. I enjoyed the artistic style the designers took, and I never had a hard time understanding what I was looking at or what I could interact with. The game didn't have any flashy visual effects or complicated animations or characters. It was basic and simple, much like the gameplay mechanics. I found that to be a real positive thing for me, specifically in a puzzle game. It let me focus on what I needed to solve and not distract me with complicated visuals. The sound in Donut Valley was really good. Each level had its own set of ambient sounds that made it nice and relaxing to listen to. While you are solving the puzzles, the music was unique for each level and it didn't get annoying at all. I enjoyed that soundtrack. Much like the graphics and gameplay, the music was simple. My ears weren't bombarded with a ton of instruments or any grand orchestration piece. The music just faded away during the levels and let me focus on solving the problem. The controls for Donut Valley are simple. You drag the hole around with your finger, and I never really had a problem with the input, at least until the last boss. The boss fight relied on you moving the hole around faster than the boss could spray ice into your hole. When trying to outrun the boss, dragging the hole felt really sluggish. And that's more than likely due to the fact that on the screen, I could move my finger faster than the hole was probably intended to move. Other than those specific instances though, I never had an issue with controlling the hole throughout the game. It took me a little bit to realize that I don't actually have to touch the hole itself in order to move it. Once I figured that out, the controls became really simple and straightforward. I would have enjoyed some haptic feedback as things went into the hole, but at the end of the day, it wasn't a deal breaker for me. Overall, Donut County was a pretty good game, and I enjoyed my time with it, despite the repetitive nature of some of the levels in the storytelling. In the end, I gave Donut County an overall score of B.